Alright, sorry, so we're picking up with part 2 of number 11. So we have y equals mx plus b. And same thing as before, I'm going to go ahead and start with my b, start with my y-intercept. So I look once again at where it crosses my y-axis. It looks like this line crosses my y-axis there at -1. So again, my b is going to be -1, or if your teacher is a little picky like me, your y-intercept would be 0, -1. Alright, so just like before, in fact I'll use a different color. I want to choose 2 points, 2 good points. So it looks to me like another good point would be here at the x-axis. So I can use both of those points. Same thing, if I'm going from my house to my friend's house, I'm not going to run through all these people's yards, all this grass. Right, I'm going to go up the block and then down. So we need to figure out our rise over run. In other words, we need to figure out our slope. Remember that slope is same thing as rise over run. Alright, so to get to my friend's house, it looks like I have to go up 1 block. So my rise is up 1. Then I also have to go over, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. So to the right 4. Alright, so I look at my equation. Again, I look at my rise over run. Going up, that's going to be positive. Going to the right, that's also going to be positive. So it looks like my rise over run, or my slope, is going to be 1/4. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as 1/4. Once I figure that, then I can say that my equation y equals mx plus b, my m is 1/4, so I have 1/4 x, and then my b, or my y-intercept, is going to be -1, so my equation is y equals 1/4 x minus 1. And then we'll do the last one. Just make sure that whenever you guys are working these, that you're looking to see whether your graph goes up or whether it goes down, and that your slope matches. It's either negative if it's going down and positive if it's going up. So part 3, again, y-intercept, we can go a little bit faster. Y-intercept is 3, or the point 0.03. And then my slope, rise over run, looks like I can use my y-intercept, and looks like that would be a good point. Looks like rise over run is going to be down to, again, I make my triangle. I'm going to go down to, and then over 1. Over 1 to the right. So down 2 is going to be -2. To the right 1 is going to be +1. -2 over 1 is going to give me -2. Now, of course, if you got 2, or if you just got +2, you would check to make sure that this was a negative, which in fact it starts low and it starts high and it ends low. So yes, in fact, it is a negative, so my slope should be a negative. Then I take this, put it together, y equals -2x plus 3. That's my final answer. Alright, we can move on to not part 12, question number 12. Question number 12 says, write an equation of a line that is parallel to the following equations. And of course your hint is to put it in slope-intercept first. So the first equation, y equals 2x minus 8, that's already in slope-intercept form. That's already in y equals mx plus b. Right? And they're asking me to do something that's parallel. And remember, parallel means same slope. Really means same slope, different y-intercept, or different b. So really, if I'm writing an equation that's the same or parallel to this one, I would just use the same slope, y equals 2x. That means that we can use this whole part of the equation, we just have to change that part. So you can use y equals 2x plus or minus whatever number you want. It doesn't matter as long as it's not -8. if you just want to use my example, I'm just going to use plus 4. Sure. Right? You can graph both of these. You can take that into y1, this into y2. You can graph them. You'd see that on your graph, you'd have two lines that are parallel. On this one now, before I just say, oh yeah, 2x, 2x, I have to make sure that, just like my directions say, that I put it in slope-intercept first. The biggest mistakes that happen on this test is a lot of us just get lazy, or we just say, hey, there's the 2x, just match the 2x. Make sure that you're not doing that. Make sure that you're writing it in y equals mx plus b form first. So again, this goes back to solving. We need to make sure that we can box that in. We don't need the x on this side. We need to put it on the other side. So we do minus 2x minus 2x. 9y comes down. These two we can't combine, so we bring them both down. My last step is to divide it by 9. 9 over 9 gives me 1. My y comes down. Negative 2 over 9 is going to stay as and then negative 18 divided by 9 is going to give me negative 2. Alright, so once I've solved it and put it in y equals mx plus b form or into slope-intercept form, now I do the exact same thing as before. We're talking about parallel, so I can match that part. I just have to change that part. So my equation could be something like y equals negative 2 over 9x, and then you can choose whatever goes in there as long as it's not minus 2. In fact, I'll do plus 2. Right, and again, you can type that equation and that equation into the calculator and see that they would create two parallel lines. Alright, the next one, 13, says write an equation of a line that is perpendicular to the following. Again, put the equation into slope-intercept first. So the first one, they keep kind of running this similar form, which is, this one's already in y equals mx plus b form. But this time I'm doing something that is perpendicular. Now, depending on which teacher you had, maybe they taught it a little bit different, but the big gist of it is that you need to make sure that it does two things. Your slope has to do two things for something to be perpendicular. It has to change sign, and the fraction has to flip. Right? You need to make sure that you're doing both of those for perpendicular. So before I can write out my equation, I need to make sure that I focus on the slope and that I do both of these things to it. So we're looking at that 3 over 4. Now here's how I do it, or here's how I show it to make sure that I do both of those. I kind of do this like a timeline. So we would do 3/4. I would show the timeline, so I do it with arrows. You can do this however you want. But my first arrow is my first change. My first change that I need to do is going to be the sign change. So right above this, I'm just going to write change sign. Of course, you don't have to do this, but just make sure that you are doing something like this in your head. Don't just try to guess or just throw something together. So changing my sign, we go from positive 3 over 4 to negative 3 over 4. Right, that's my first one, the sign change. My next one is going to be the fraction flip. Which fraction flip, all that means is that the 4 is going to go to the top, the negative 3 goes down to the bottom. So we have 4 over negative 3. Or, I mean, really with this, I'll go ahead and say one other thing with that. Really, negative 4 over 3. Negative 4 on top and a 3, and 4 and negative 3 on the bottom. All of these are the exact same. If you put the negative out on the front, if you put the negative next to the 4, and if you put the negative next to the 3, they're all the exact same thing. My fraction is negative 4 over 3. Well, the thing with perpendicular is you can actually have the same y-intercept, but I always like to change it just because. So my new equation would be y equals my new slope, which is negative 4 over 3, x, right? We change the sign and flip it. And then plus or minus whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Again, if you want to use my example, we can just do, I don't know, plus 11. As long as it's different. Now, of course, if you graph this, sometimes you can tell that it's perpendicular. Sometimes you can tell that there's a 40-degree angle. Sometimes you can't. It just is what it is. Next one for B, we have to make sure that once we solve this, that well, first we have to put it in y-intercept first, or slope-intercept form first. So first we have to solve. So we do 2 times x, which gives me 2x. 2 times positive 5, which gives me positive 10. These two come down. And then I need to make sure that I box in my y. I need to get rid of the minus 4, so I add 4 to both sides. My y comes all the way down. We have that y equals 2x plus 14. Alright, so there's my equation. Same thing as before, I need to make sure that I'm doing perpendicular, so I need to focus on my slope. I need to do the 2 things to it. So I'm going to go ahead and show it once again. 2, again, sign change. So positive 2 becomes negative 2. Next I have to flip my fraction. Well, before I can flip my fraction, I need to make sure that the negative 2 is a fraction. So to make negative 2 a fraction, I just do negative 2 over 1. Anytime that you have a whole number, you just put it over 1. That's just what we do. And now I can flip it. Again, if I flip it, the 1 comes down, the negative 2, or sorry, the 1 goes up, the negative 2 comes down. So we have 1 over negative 2, or negative 1/2. So now I can write my equation. My equation would be y equals negative 1/2 x. And then same thing as before. It doesn't matter what you put in here. You can do whatever you want. Again, the important thing, or the important part of perpendicular is going to be that right there. That you flipped it and that you changed the sign. So again, you can put whatever you want. I'll just put plus 7. But there's my equation that's perpendicular. Alright, now last one, part C. Same thing, we have to make sure that we solve. So I need to solve for y. I need to box in the y with the sign. So box in the negative y. I need this x on the other side, so I subtract x. This comes down. I have minus y. These two are two different things. Bring them both down. And then I divide by the number in front of y, which technically there's not a number there, but just remember that in algebra you're not going to see it, but we can technically write a 1 in there. So whenever I divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1. Right, so negative 1 divided by negative 1 turns into a big 1. My y comes down. We have y equal to negative x divided by negative 1. Technically, just like before, that's a negative 1. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 gives me positive 1. So I'm going to have just 1x. And then this right here, the sign sticks to it, so make sure that you're doing negative 6. Negative 6 divided by negative 1 gives me positive 6. So there's my equation. Y equals 1x plus 6. And just like before, I need to make this perpendicular. So I focus on my slope. I need to do 2 things to it. So 1, that number 1, I need to change the sign. So positive 1 becomes negative 1. And I need to flip the fraction. Well, before I can flip it, I need to make sure that I make it into a fraction. Negative 1 as a fraction would be negative 1 over 1. And then flipping the fraction, the 1 goes up, the negative 1 comes down. We get 1 over negative 1, which is still just the same thing. In fact, I don't have to write this as a fraction because negative 1 divided by 1 is still just negative 1. So my equation would be y equals negative 1x. If you want to leave it as a fraction, negative 1 over negative 1 is fine. Again, plus or minus whatever you want. Doesn't matter. There's my equation. Again, the thing that we focus on is that. Did you write something that was perpendicular?